Hi, my name is John Lester, and I'm the Chief Learning Officer at a company called Reaction Grid. And we develop multi-user 3D virtual world platforms for a wide range of uses. And I want to thank you for inviting me to speak at this virtual enterprise conference. I apologize that I won't be there live, but I thought it would be fun to create a video of my presentation. And we'll explore some 3D environments, and I'll talk a little bit about best practices for using virtual world technologies, and also the idea of the right tool for the right job, what makes these 3D immersive technologies compelling, and how to use them efficiently and effectively. I'm actually logged into my demonstration space. Here's my avatar. He looks like me. He looks a lot like me because he's actually based on my real face, and I used a program called Evolver to take different photographs from different perspectives of my head, and then it infers the 3D geometry of my head, which I think it got pretty well, and then actually maps my face, the bitmap of my face, onto it. But I'm in a demonstration area here. I can actually stand my avatar up here, and this demonstration area is a space where I try out different things, and I use it as a place to illustrate the possibilities of how you can use 3D immersive environments. And you can see I can walk my avatar around, and I can interact with different things. I can fly as well. It's always good to fly. But this is me in the virtual world, and so I'm going to start talking about the right tool for the right job and how you can use these environments effectively. You probably hear birds in the background too. That's because I really like ambient sounds. And also just interesting environments. There goes a dragon. There he goes, flying overhead. We'll come back here later and have some fun exploring. But for now, let's jump to the slides. So I'm just going to close this. I'm going to close this window here. There we go. These slides are available online, and here's the link to them, so you can always check them out yourself if you like. So the title of my talk is The Right Tool for the Right Job and Best Practices for Virtual Worlds. My background is actually in not computer science but neuroscience. I worked at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School for many years, about 13 years, initially doing research in neuroscience, but then getting more involved in using computing technology to create immersive environments to create spaces for people to learn, to communicate and share knowledge and information more effectively than in other technologies. Over time, I actually also I've switched careers a little bit. I explored working at Linden Lab, the creators of Second Life. I worked at Linden Lab for 5 years, and I've been working at Reaction Grid now, and I'm the Chief Learning Officer as of this month. I've been here for about a year and a half, and what Reaction Grid does is create 3D simulation and virtual world platforms for a wide range of applications. A lot of our customers are educators and people focused on learning, so a lot of academics and a lot of businesses too, using virtual worlds for things like team learning, team collaboration, professional development, and so forth. But really what we focus on as a company is creating very general purpose 3D virtual world platforms. And we develop these environments and these tools that work on both desktop and mobile devices. But a big part of what we do also is really helping clients understand the best practices for developing successful immersive learning projects. So I work with a lot of clients on the instructional design aspect of creating these spaces, but also just helping them understand what are virtual environments good for and how can you really be a pioneer in using them. How can you create something that is really, truly groundbreaking and will have a transformative effect on on the people using it. So we spend a lot of time talking about best practices, and that's what we're going to talk about today as well. Our clients are a wide range of folks. We actually have a lot of universities, but as well as universities, we have enterprise organizations, government organizations, NASA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Department of Energy. The common theme here is they are all interested in using 3D environments and using multi-user virtual world environments to augment learning, to engage people in environments with other people to create new opportunities for collaboration. They're interested in being pioneers, and we like working with people who are interested in being pioneers. So immersive learning and some best practices. When I talk about immersive learning, I always like to talk about emotional bandwidth. And what do I mean by emotional bandwidth? I mean the way different technologies allow you to convey different amounts of information, particularly emotional information. What's the emotional bandwidth of a particular technology? And a good example is to think about the difference between the written word, typing back and forth to somebody in an instant message or so forth, and speaking to them, talking to them on the phone, having an opportunity where you actually can hear the inflection of their voice. There's a lot more emotional bandwidth in the spoken word. And of course, the ultimate, the highest level of emotional bandwidth is face-to-face interaction, because there's a great deal of information being conveyed when you're talking to someone face-to-face through body language, through facial expressions, and also just in the fact that you are in a space. The place where your interactions happen convey a lot of information. If you meet with somebody in their office, you learn so much about that person just by looking around at the 3D space. So what we like to do is also think about how we can create at Reaction Grid new tools to increase emotional bandwidth. And if you look at virtual worlds as a broad technology, that's what they're that's what they're all about. They're about increasing the emotional bandwidth between people, allowing people to interact with each other in a way where there's more information flowing back and forth than ever before. And some of the best practices around creating of immersive learning environments obviously also has to do with using existing tools better, how to integrate existing tools into these new technologies. So I like to think a lot about emotional bandwidth. You've probably all had situations where you've been in an IM conversation with somebody, and the conversation has done a bit of a downward spiral. You ever have that happen? I bet you have. We all have, where there's miscommunication, right? Because you're not conveying things enough through the narrow emotional bandwidth of typing letters on your keyboard. And usually what happens is someone says, let's just get on a phone call. I want to hear your voice. I want to understand what's going on here. And then everything works out when you start talking on the phone. Or even more, ideally, let's meet face to face. Let's have dinner and talk about this over dinner. That's what I mean by emotional bandwidth. And the power of virtual worlds, the reason they are often a right tool for the right job is, where you want to increase emotional bandwidth, that's where virtual worlds can really step in and be very effective. It's the right tool for the right job if you're trying to increase emotional bandwidth to the maximum amount as possible. I'm just taking a sip of soda. Doing this all live without a net. One take. Bound by our biology. And a reason why virtual worlds are very effective is because, a big reason is because our brain is basically designed to thrive in a 3D environment full of embodied people and places. Our brains evolved to enjoy these environments and to be stimulated by situations where there are other people in interesting places. The two are important. You have to have both. It's not just an interesting place, and it's not just people. It's people in places. A big part of our brain's horsepower has to do with how we, a big part of our brain is generating constantly, information about, social relationships and how to be a social animal, right? Our brains are as big as they are, largely because we're social creatures. Our brains had to grow to accommodate all the information processing we have to do around being a social animal and being an organism that interacts with a 3D environment, with people in places. So our brains love people and places. And we often forget the importance of, a lot of these social cues and things that build empathy and trust, which, of course, trust is a very, very powerful commodity if you're trying to build effective global companies these days as well, thinking about it from the perspective of enterprise. The hardest thing to do when you're building a global team, is to get them to really trust each other, Because once you've got that trust, then efficiency, happens. It ramps up, and people work effectively together as a team. Only once they trust each other. And a lot of the ways you build trust is, through a lot of these different social cues that you have when you're interacting with people and places. Another interesting aspect of our mind, I think, is the fact that what we experience in these virtual environments feels real because our brain fills in the gaps. Our brain is great at taking partial information and just filling in the gaps. So eventually, what we're looking at on the screen becomes, to our mind, not so much looking at a screen, but more of looking through a window. And we start seeing these environments, and our mind starts treating them as real. It fills in the gaps. I mean, you probably all had the experience of even watching a movie, right? When you're in a movie and the car goes off the cliff, you feel a pit in your stomach. I have a limbic system response to that. Your brain is filling in the gaps. You know consciously you're not in that car, but the camera is in the car, and your brain fills in the gaps, and suddenly you're not aware of yourself sitting in a theater. You feel like you're actually in the car. The same thing happens with these virtual environments, even more so because you are controlling your perspective. You are controlling your avatar in these spaces. So at some point your brain just clicks and treats it as reality because our brain is great at filling in the gaps. That's something we do very well. Very powerful aspect of our biology. So we're bound by our biology, and this is where virtual worlds fit in as a very powerful technology because it leverages this fact that our brain loves people and places, and that we fill in the gaps very well, and that we can use a lot of these cues to help build empathy and trust, which is something very precious. These are just some examples of how powerful our brain is at pattern matching and filling in the gaps. These are just sketches. These are squiggly lines, yet we look at these and we immediately recognize them as human beings, and we immediately also recognize some fairly complex emotional states. Right? The difference between this guy here, I'm going to punch you in the nose, aggressive, and despondent, and the wide range of emotional states. There's so much data our brain is inferring just by looking at these people. These sketches, these aren't even people, these are just drawings. And this also goes to facial expressions as well. We read so much data through facial expressions. Over time as virtual worlds evolve and you end up with avatars, because these aren't pictures, these are actual faces that are simulated. Over time, as we can do things like convey more subtle expressions with faces, with avatars, we'll be able to convey even more emotion between simulations of human faces. Now all this is great. We're bound by our biology. Our brains are awesome. But at the same time, there are some common pitfalls. Sometimes our brains are overeager. Sometimes we do too much pattern matching. And by pattern matching, I mean, filling in the gaps and looking at something, and your brain, the first thing it does when it is treated with a novel stimulus is it thinks, what does this remind me of? What does this remind me of that I already know? The classic example is the tiger in the grass. You see a yellow eye, you see some stripes. At some point your brain, we learned early on that this is a great survival advantage. There's a lot of selective pressure to be able to identify tigers in the grass as quickly as possible. You don't want to have to walk up to it and be, I don't see the rest of the animal. I need more data. Right? That's a good way to get eaten. We're very good at just seeing a little bit of information, like this picture right here, and immediately understanding what this is. And we've seen it before, and we recognized it, so we filled in the gaps. But the problem is sometimes our brain does it too much. It can be overeager. And this equates to lost opportunities, in particular with tools. Using a new tool like an old tool, because the new tool reminds us of the old tool. This is a subconscious event. We're not aware that we do this because our brains just do it instinctively, always. But this translates into a lot of lost opportunities, in particular with virtual worlds, and I'll go into more detail about that later. This is one of my favorite books, New Media from 1740 to 1915. This is an MIT Press book if you're interested in getting it. But it talks about the history of how we have looked at new technologies, new media technologies. Things like the telephone, the telegraph, the television, the phonograph, and how we have treated those new technologies when they were first introduced into society. And what happens when a new technology is first introduced to us? We typically don't understand how to use it in a truly innovative way. You all have seen this logo before. This is RCA's logo. And this is the classic, the caption to this is His Master's Voice. Have you ever wondered why it's His Master's voice and not His Master's music? That's because when the phonograph was first invented, everyone thought the killer app for the phonograph would be to record human voices. They thought the killer app for the phonograph would be to record authors reading their own stories. People reading things. They thought it would all be about voice. We totally missed the boat initially on how this would transform music, because initially we didn't even think about it. We didn't think about how the phonograph would evolve into something that would become basically the ability to reanimate live performances, which something no one had ever done before. Instead, we sort of thought along conventional lines of, okay, this looks like something that we could kind of like the telegraph, but with voice. But we could use records to archive things like books. We were looking at a new technology, and we weren't quite getting the full potential of it. And it took a while before we understood that the phonograph was, the killer app with the phonograph was music. Here's an exceptional example, I think, where this is Charlie Chaplin, who's a brilliant director. When the motion picture camera was first invented, they basically stuck it on a tripod like this and filmed plays. One camera, one tripod, no movement of the camera. The camera just sat there. And so subsequently, movies, when you were watching a movie, it felt a lot like you were watching a play. And that's because when the motion picture camera was first rolled out, everyone looked at it, the projected screen, and they thought, well, that's all right, we could sit in a theater, and it's like sitting in a theater watching a play, so let's just make our movies like plays. It took decades for the language of cinematography to evolve, for the idea, for brilliant directors like Charlie Chaplin to come up with ideas like, well, I could move the camera while I'm filming it, or I got a crazy idea. Let's have two cameras filming at the same time, and later on we'll splice the film back and forth so the perspective shifts in the final movie. Something totally different. You don't experience that when you're sitting in the audience watching a play. A play is all about one fixed viewpoint. The point here is that it took decades for us to figure out the truly innovative way to use the motion picture camera, because for decades we basically were just recreating what we knew. We were recreating the familiar because our brains, looked at the motion picture camera and thought, what does this remind us of? And it reminds us of plays. And you see this time and time again. The telephone initially was used very much like the telegraph. It was used for conveying messages back and forth. Not conversations. It was all about reading messages on the telephone. The web, the early days of the web. You probably all remember how in the early days of the web, websites looked a lot like desktop publishing gone wild, right? It looked like, tons of brochures and newsletters everywhere. And that's because people looked at the web and thought, well, it's all about publishing things like text and pictures, like publishing newsletters and desktop publishing paradigm. Let's put our brochure up there, scan our brochure. That's our website. This is the future. The concept of things like you could buy and sell things on the web, like books, like with Amazon, or maybe even things like eBay. You could sell the stuff in your basement, or you could interact with other people on the web and collaborate and share photographs and have this whole evolution of a social web. That again, if you think about it, it took a couple decades for us to figure that out. It's from the early 90s with the web to where we are today, 2012. 2 decades since then. So the point is we look at these new technologies and we often get it wrong. And the reason we get it wrong is because we recreate the familiar. We look at the new tool, we treat it like the old tool, and we use it to recreate what we've already been creating. We use the web to recreate desktop publishing newsletters. We use the motion picture camera to recreate plays, right? And we do this also because it just feels safe. But if you're trying to create deep learning environments, if you're trying to create those moments when people will have epiphanies and learn something amazing that will stay with them. Those types of things happen when we're fascinated with and challenged by our environment. So in terms of best practices, think about that when you're creating immersive 3D experiences. You want to fascinate people and challenge them at the same time. Because I guarantee if you think about some of the most amazing things that you've learned in your life, I guarantee you they happened not when you were bored. They happened when you were fascinated with and challenged by your environment and the people in your environment, the place and the people. So creating engagement is important. So let's think about creating places and people. Here's an example of people in a place that most folks have probably experienced firsthand, probably on a daily basis. The meeting with people sitting around a table, taking notes. It's effective, but not very engaging if you think about it. There's usually a lot of coffee involved, as you can see in this photograph. There's lots of coffee cups everywhere to keep you sort of engaged, right? And it's interesting when you think about new technologies, in particular the things like teleconferencing, right? This is cool. Here you got these monitors, 1, 2, 3 monitors and a camera, and you're adding these people to the table, but that's all you're doing, right? You're adding them to the table. How much more engaging is this than just a regular table? Well, there's a novelty in these people being at a distance. And there is more emotional bandwidth, obviously, but at the same time, is this really a pioneering use of all this telecommunications technology? We've just made the table bigger. I like to think about things like that. And here's the virtual world. Here's an example of a virtual world environment. And it is an exact replica. These types of environments, you see them a lot. Avatars sitting on virtual chairs in front of virtual tables looking at recreations of PowerPoint slides. And even the same dynamics here, one person up here and everyone sitting around. Is this the best we can do with the technology? Is this the best we can do? It's familiar. It's safe. We like safe. We like familiar. There's value. There's some value. I'm not saying this is valueless, but is this filming a play? Is this really using the technology in a truly innovative way? So let's think about how you could go beyond that. So here's an example of a virtual world where they decided to do something fanciful with the architecture, something you really won't see in the physical world because it's just too expensive, or even defying the laws of gravity and materials. The use of materials. You can't build things that'll stand up like this. Creating a space that was engaging and fanciful, that had some touchstones of reality. Here are trees and here are some billboards and we see avatars. The trick is finding the balance, I think. The balance between the familiar and the fantastical, because the stuff that's out there is what's going to really get people's brains going, getting them excited, making them remember. Right? They'll remember this, not so much this. Right? Oh, I remember the slides. The walls were beige. Here you'll remember this environment. And the more engaging an environment is, the more you'll remember what happens in that environment. So let's just look at an example, taking it even further. Here are examples of, this is an example in Second Life of where they had, a teacher had created a recreation of a temple in Egypt and then allowed students to role play in the temple, the roles of different religious figures to learn more about the culture. Wow, right? A lot better than looking at slides of a temple. Here's a case where there's a human larynx that was built about 8 stories high so you could fly through it and see the complex anatomy of how the human larynx works, when you're speaking, how the vocal cords work. The students could go right inside of it and get the view, flying through the piece of the anatomy, and getting a deep understanding of the three-dimensional nature of this and how it all works together. So much more powerful than, say, being in a simulated environment like this, or maybe, here's a picture of the human larynx in the virtual world, or here's a model on a table. You can look at it with your avatar. Again, I think think of engagement beyond what you already are doing in the physical world. Go beyond it. Create molecular models that are as large as houses and walk through them. Think about how to engage people in memorable ways. That's the trick. That's a best practice that's so important. I won't play this video right now, but this is an example of a virtual learning center created by the Adult Education Group, our RSU3 in Maine. But it's a real great example of, their challenge was to reduce rural isolation. So they built some areas in their virtual world that looked familiar, but also other areas that were fanciful, that really engaged people in novel and innovative ways. A very powerful aspect of best practices. And this kind of ties into my favorite best practice. These folks, the Maine folks back here, their challenge was to reduce rural isolation. They kept that laser focused constantly. They were always thinking about that. And this ties in with my favorite best practice, is to define and always remember your strategic goals. And this quote by Sun Tzu: strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, and tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Tactics is how are we going to climb this mountain? Strategy is should we climb this mountain, or maybe that mountain over there? Or why are we climbing this mountain? Should we even be climbing any mountain? Which mountain should we climb first? A lot of the discussions you'll hear around any kind of pioneering new technology, and I'm sure you'll hear about a lot of different ones at this virtual enterprise conference. A lot of what you hear is tactics, how to use this thing, this cool new device in this particular way. Often strategy seems to get the short end of the stick. So it seems sometimes it gets forgotten. People stop asking why. People stop asking, the overall strategy. What are our goals? What are our strategic goals? So I spend a lot of time when I'm working with clients and colleagues talking about strategy, tactics, and strategic goals, and overall goals for any type of project. Very important that you keep this conversation always in the foreground when you're talking about virtual world technologies. And some more best practices that I really like. Engaging people easily and everywhere. You want to make sure these 3 E's are always happening. You want to make your experience easy to get into. You want to make it accessible in many different ways, on the web, mobile devices, whatever. You want to make sure all your tools, as much as possible, work with each other, which means they can share information. And that ties in with using industry standards as much as possible. And really focusing on augmenting. So that's probably one of my favorite words in the English language, is augmenting. You want to think about what you're going to be doing with a virtual world technology can augment what you've already done. You want to think about how can what I'm doing leverage all of the work and money my organization has put into developing web-based content. How does it integrate with that? So this is a critical thing to keep in mind. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Jibe platform, which is one of the virtual world platforms that we've developed here at Reaction Grid. We've also done work with Open Simulator. But Jibe is something completely new, and we're very excited about it because we think it does a lot of things that can really bring virtual worlds to the next level. It's a multi-user 3D virtual world platform that we've created using Unity 3 technology and a bunch of other technologies, a lot of things that we've written from scratch, as well as other best-of-breed technologies like Unity 3D. And Unity 3D is it's a very popular technology used for 3D game development specifically. And one of the particularly powerful aspects of a Jibe world is that it can be embedded on any web page. And we have mobile support in progress. We already have it working on Android devices, and iOS is coming. And perhaps most exciting is the fact that it integrates and communicates with web portals, learning management systems, content management systems, and industry standard databases. Because on the back end, we've designed it that way. We've designed Jibe from the ground up to be something that can interoperate, that can communicate with all these other technologies. And I'll show you a little bit of some examples of that. So it can be embedded on the web. It's using industry standard technologies. It integrates with all this pre-existing web-based content and other systems that exist on the web or the internet in general. Now, what does it look like? Don't worry about this diagram. You don't have to. There will be no quiz. This is very complex, but the point is, everything together on this page this is what Jibe is. Jibe is an ecosystem of different technologies and tools that we have put together in a way that just does something we think is pretty exciting. There's all this back-end stuff that we've written, that we've created, the user database system, the system for managing assets and in-world event tracking and so forth, this whole HTTP suite of applications, and all this stuff that we've integrated to allow hooks for interfacing with robotics devices, things like Lego Mindstorms and so forth, as well as telemetry, collecting data from sensors and so forth, and having data move in and out via net sockets, moving in and out of the system. On the back end, we use these technologies, SmartFox and Photon, to scale the networking so that you can have very high concurrency. Right? These are technologies that are used by commercial, massively multiplayer online game companies. And we use Unity 3D as the front end, and we've designed it so that you actually use Unity 3D, the editor itself. You use the industry standard Unity 3D editor to build your Jibe world, to build the 3D content, to do all of the scripting, which is also using industry standards. All of the scripting in Jibe is using JavaScript and C#. So it's all about standards. We've really focused on using industry standards where it makes sense, choosing best of breed technologies that are proven to be reliable and work really well. And we've designed all of this technology, with all of our custom technology and all of our custom middleware that connects it all. We've designed it all to be modular. So over time, you can replace Unity 3D here with WebGL, because WebGL is going to be really hot in a few years. We think it's exciting stuff. HTML5, the ability to have these 3D environments in your web browser without using plugins. So this is coming, right? And because we've designed all of this to be modular, it can grow. It's not brittle. We're using Vivox voice. Maybe we could use another voice technology over time. Sure, because we've designed this to be modular. We've designed the ecosystem of Jibe to be something that evolves over time easily. And can adapt and grow. So all of this together is what Jibe is, the Jibe ecosystem. And this is what it looks like. And let's jump in here real quick and see what it looks like. This is a snapshot of my demo world. And I'm just going to click on this because remember, it's all on the web. I'm just going to click and it's going to load a web page. And you can actually, let me go back over here. Oh, here it is. I'm going to reload it. I'll move it down a little bit so you can see, here's the URL for the web page. The screen's a little squeezed because I'm making it lower resolution for video. But here you can see the actual Unity 3D plugin loading. If you don't have the plugin installed, it's loading the content now. The plugin is only about 20 megabytes. So if you come to a page that has a Jibe world and you don't have the Unity plugin, you'll see a little button that says click here, and it just loads it. And it doesn't even require a reload or anything. It just loads the plugin and it starts working right away. Now, a very powerful thing to think about is the fact that you have your virtual world on the same page as all of these other things on the web, right? So I have the ability to embed, all these social media tools, +1 this, tweet this. I can integrate a Twitter feed over here. I also have a slide share over here on the edge, you can see. All of this on the same web page, and when I click Start, this allows me to log in. You're hearing music. This is like waiting room music, as you're sitting here, choosing your avatar, picking a different avatar, changing the clothes, different clothing options. I'm actually going to select my avatar, which looks like me, and I can actually rotate my avatar around. And, I can be sitting here looking at the Twitter feed while I'm playing with my avatar. Think about the potential of, once you've integrated a virtual world with all the other stuff you've got on the web. It's pretty exciting stuff, I think. Now, I just clicked enter, and here I am in my environment. And in my environment, I have all of the things you'd expect in a virtual world. Like I can chat, I can say hello, there's nobody here. I just saw a shadow go by, there's that dragon. I have him flying around the island. I can see if there's anyone else online. Right now there isn't anybody online. It's just me. But I could use voice and things like that to communicate with folks. Here's a little scripted game that I set up. It's the memory card game. If I click on these different memory cards, it tries to... I'm not going to do very well. I know I'm not. I really suck at this game. Was that a snake? No, that was a whale. Oh, the colors are the same between the bird and the fish. There's an ant. Yay! There we go. They disappeared. I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. But this is me in the 3D environment. There's all that you'd expect. I have my avatar. I can fly, as I showed you before, and everything around here these are all mesh models that I've pulled in. I have some wonderfully animated big chickens here that are clucking. You probably hear them. Perceptually immersive. You have physics too. Here's a wall that I just collapsed. All of the bricks just fell down. The system uses the NVIDIA physics engine, which is built into Unity. And so all the things you expect. You can fly. You can teleport around. You can. Here's a really neat little effect. We've got this weather system I set up here. I can change the weather, so I can say, make it stormy. Now hold on to your hats. There's going to be lightning. Click storm. There we go. And you can see the weather suddenly changing. Here come the clouds. You can hear the winds. So the lighting's dramatically changed. Go back to clear, please. Change the weather back. So you can do neat things with procedurally generated weather. Which means it's generated by software. You can have the clouds be dynamic however you want. But I want to show you this one particular feature which I think is very powerful, and I'm going to slide the screen over here. So, this is a different part of the web page. This is just a different iframe. And here's a model of an HIV virus here. Now, as I walk up to it, watch what happens. I walk up to this model, and you heard a bell, and automatically what has loaded over here is Wikipedia's entry on HIV. Oh, look at that. While I'm exploring and looking at the 3D model close up here, beautiful model for such a terrible virus, I'm reading about it as well. I'm leveraging pre-existing web-based content, and it's contextually relevant. It just popped up while I looked at this model. How cool is that? Huh? I walk away from the model, and it goes back to whatever it was, or anything else I want to do. The point being is, in this example, I've got scripts, I have code running in the 3D environment that is talking to the web page, sending data that's being grabbed by some JavaScript running on this page, which is then changing the web page. And this is a very simple example, just changing what's in an iframe. But think about the potential of being able to go beyond that, and you'll understand the power of this, I think, as a concept. Because once you've got your 3D virtual world on the web like this, integrated with industry standards and all these other tools, you can start thinking about how you can use the 3D environment for what the 3D environment is best for, and then the 2D environment that's already visible on your page for what it's best for. I have to show my little companion cube here. If I click on it,
the Enrichment Center reminds you that the weighted companion cube cannot speak.
Oh, wow.
In the event that the weighted companion cube does speak, the Enrichment Center urges you to disregard its advice.
Thank you. And there are all kinds of little interactive things here. I can sit in a chair. If I look at my cat, I'm petting the cat. It starts meowing. And there's different. Here's a teleport. Click on this sign to teleport to the windmill, and suddenly I'm in a different environment. The wind is blowing, and there's a windmill in the distance here. So you can see you have all the tools at your disposal to create something fun and engaging. And I think I'm going to close the window now. We'll go back to the slides and start wrapping things up here a little bit. Here's a screenshot of what it looks like when you change the weather. So you saw how you can do neat things like that. And again, an example of here's where other people are in the environment. Think about the potential of virtual worlds when you integrate them with the web. When you not just make them accessible via the web, but when you integrate them with what's happening on the web. Think about the power of avatars being able to click on a button on on something in world, click on something, and suddenly have slides appear on the web page, right? There's no need here for avatars to look at a screen. You could do that, but you could, have the slides appearing in a frame over here, or have things like collaborative drawing programs, of which there are many on the web, and embedding that. And you could set it up so that data, people could be filling out a quiz, which is embedded in an iframe, and the results of that data could be changing the virtual world in Jibe, and it could also be sending data to a learning management system, keeping track of their score or their grade or their progression through the course material. So that's the power, I think, in terms of best practices when you're thinking about where virtual worlds could go. We like to think that Jibe is a clear illustration of where it can go today, because this platform exists right now. Here's another example of beautiful architecture, and you can visit these worlds on your own with the slides if you want to. Here's a wonderful example where Rutgers has integrated Jibe into their existing website. They have their Center for Online and Hybrid Learning and Instructional Technology, and you can actually, they're building a stadium, I think, where you can play football or something. And you can also meet with people because they hold office hours. Rick Anderson holds office hours. And you can go in here and you can meet with him. And you can chat with him via text or voice, because Jibe also, remember, supports voice through Vivox. So to wrap things up here, I wanted to keep this to about 45 minutes. There's an old story of a wise old fisherman who was very successful. And one day this wise old fisherman was sitting on the beach, and a young fisherman came up to him and said, "Oh, I'm not catching any fish. I'm a failure as a fisherman. You're so successful. Every time you come into port, your nets are full of fish. What is your secret? How are you so successful at catching so many fish?" And the wise fisherman said, "I fish where the fish live." And I think that's very wise advice for people who are looking to do things with virtual worlds where the audience is increased, where they want to get as many people as possible. Because, again, a wonderful virtual world experience is useless if no one gets into it, if no one accesses it, right? Otherwise, it's an empty shell. You want to have people moving through these environments. And so, for example, whether or not you think Facebook is good or bad, there are pluses and minuses to anything. The fact of the matter is millions and millions of people on the planet access Facebook. So think about your strategy for using virtual worlds over time, where, because Jibe, for example, is a web-based environment, this is Jibe embedded in Facebook. You can see here, I'm logged in using Virtual Career Center at Rock Creek. This is a project involving the Department of Energy and the U.S. Department of the Interior, the National Park Service. They wanted to create an environment where they could give people the ability to walk through examples of their parks, and also have a career center where you had employees from the National Park Service and the Department of Energy meeting with people in interesting 3D environments and communicating, talking via text or voice. And this is all in Facebook. A lot of fish live in Facebook, right? So if you think about trying to get people into your environments, into your virtual world environments, think about fishing where the fish live. Very powerful to use this type of a strategy, right? So that's pretty much it. That's my talk. These are the different ways to get in touch with me. I am on Twitter. I have my email address. My About Me profile gives much more information about me. And we have a wonderful mailing list, which is basically conversations about how to use Jibe and Unity 3D, because most of what you learn as you're working in Jibe is learning how to use Unity 3D and mesh modeling programs and how to use JavaScript. Again, these are all industry standard tools and technologies. And my slides are available here as well. And so to really just summarize here, virtual worlds are a very powerful tool for very specific jobs. It's about finding the right match, the right tool for the right job. And to do that, you have to think about these best practices of remembering, why these virtual environments are so engaging. The fact that we need to sometimes overcome our tendency to recreate the familiar. Think about creating the next level of sort of crazy engagement. Right? Step out of that safe space. Do something really innovative. Take a chance. And then lastly, thinking about environments like Jibe, where you are integrating with all of the stuff that's already out there. You're augmenting, because really, ideally, I think in the future, these virtual environments aren't going to be about replacing what we already have, but they will be about how we can take what we've already done and take it all with us as we move forward to something new. So that's my presentation. If anyone has any questions or would like to follow up with me, please contact me through these different means. And I hope this was fun for you, and hope to talk to you sometime soon. Take care. Bye-bye.